Welcome back to QuackFab. In the last video, we did the stock floor body drop and grafted on the Gen 5 Camaro independent rear suspension. By the end of this video, we are going to get the frame to lay flat on the floor. First thing I noticed was this bracket here was binding with the lower control arm, so I trimmed away only what was necessary to allow the control arm to pivot up further. Once that bracket was trimmed, the next area of interference was this area. The yellow represents where the metal used to go, and the red is where I cut for more clearance. Now that the control arm could pivot further up, it was now making contact with the frame itself. There are two ways to clearance this area. The way I chose was to pie cut the area marked in yellow, then hammer the frame up and weld it back together. The other way I know to create clearance here is a method called de-humping. It is where you weld steel plates to the bottom of the control arm, then cut off the area circled in yellow and weld plates in there as well. It makes me uneasy to modify certain parts because if my welds fail while I'm driving, a wheel could get ripped off, so I decided that de-humping wasn't for me. Now that I had an air gap between the frame and lower control arm, I thought for sure it would be laying frame. I was wrong. It was close, but not quite there. Now the upper control arm was causing interference in the area shown in this pic. I made two small cuts to the upper control arm mount to allow the upper control arm to articulate up further. I put the knuckles and wheels back on to test it out, and voila, it was now laying frame in the front. That is, until I connected the tie rods to the knuckles. I had to flip the frame back over and fabricate a channel in the frame for the tie rods to fit in when the truck is laid out. As you can see in the pics, I cut out a section wide enough for the tie rods to fit in and then welded in some 3/16 inch thick steel. Now that I had it laying frame with all the suspension components attached, I started questioning the extreme angle of the front upper ball joints. I did some research and found several forums where they discuss cutting the upper control arms in the area indicated by this pic. My plan was to see how inexpensively I could do this build, but not at the expense of safety. So, as I stated before, modifying a control arm isn't for me. I ended up buying a set of upper and lower tubular control arms that were designed for a 4-inch drop, so they had angles built into them that greatly reduced the stress on the upper ball joint. Now that the front was laying frame, it was time to get the rear laying frame. I felt that the easiest way to get the rear of the frame on the ground was to move the entire subframe up 1 inch. I cut all 4 perches off and clearanced the frame rails to allow the subframe to move upward. I roughly clearanced the frame with a plasma cutter first, then I cut the rear perches off and welded them back on 1 inch higher. Then I cut the front perches off and welded them back on 1 inch higher. I then removed the subframe and flipped the frame again to finish weld everything in permanently. While the frame was upside down, I welded the cab mounts back on the frame and cut the parts off that would stick below the frame. Now it was time to get the airbags mounted. When my brother owned the truck, we had already clearanced and installed the front airbags. All I had to do was cut the lower bag cup down a little bit. In the rear, I removed the stock Camaro coilover and welded a round plate to the top of the rear lower control arm where the coilover used to attach. I then bolted in an airbag and bolted a top plate to the top of the airbag. Then I welded a frame bar from the front lower subframe perch to the rear upper subframe perch. I did this to strengthen the frame and to provide a point to weld the upper airbag bracket to. I then welded in a stringer between the two frame rails to provide twisting resistance. Now that the airbags were secure, I added some temporary air hoses with Schrader valves on them so I could air the frame up, then down, then up, then down. One more time, up, then down. I'm an adult child. I couldn't help myself. Then my brother and I stood there admiring what we had accomplished. I think my cousin was there too, in the white shoes. Well, that's enough quack fabbing for today. Tune in next time and I'll show you how I went about raising the bed floor to accommodate the new independent rear suspension. Thanks for watching QuackFab. If you have any advice or ideas, please leave a comment. If you enjoyed the video, please leave a like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.